So now let's look at the question. So which of the following best states the central idea of the passage? The War of Independence. So this is something we have done without options, but let's look at it. The War of Independence produced among many black Americans a heightened consciousness of inequities in American society. This is not at all talked, right? Yes, there was a lot of inequity, I agree, but it was not creating any feeling among the black Americans. This was not at all talked in the passage. They didn't say about the feelings of black Americans specifically. They said Americans felt that there is inequity. That agreed, right? The contradiction was realized, so Americans acknowledged, but not just the many black Americans. This word is a bigger problem for me in this. The War of Independence strengthened the bonds of slavery of many black Americans while intensifying their desire to be free. Again, this is also absolutely nonsense, because strengthen the bonds of slavery of many black Americans, this is not at all talked anywhere, and intensifying their desire to be free. There was nowhere a passage talking about the black Americans who were slaves had the intensity to, the intensity was increasing or decreasing to be free or anything like that. From their perspective, the passage has not talked anything specifically. So that's also out of, discussion. The War of Independence exposed to many Americans the contradiction of slavery in a country seeking its freedom and resulted in efforts to resolve that contradiction. This seems to be the theme that we've discussed, right? So first point, the War of Independence exposed to many Americans the contradiction of slavery. The same thing that they were fighting for their freedom while they were taking away the freedom from someone else, that contradiction was exposed to many Americans, right? Exposed to many Americans in a country seeking its own freedom. And it resulted in efforts to resolve that contradiction. As I said, right, the Americans acknowledged it and they worked towards resolving that contradiction. So this looks to be a very good option for me. But this is like summarizing what I've discussed as the main theme. Right, if you remember, right, this is what I said. Inconsistency in the freedom fight, that you are fighting for your freedom and you're taking it from someone else, and then your Americans acknowledged and worked towards, changing that. That's what the option C is looking like. I would go with it, but let's look at the other two. As I said, never ever just mark the answer once you feel that's the answer. Eliminate the other options confidently, then only mark the remaining one as the correct answer. The War of the Independence provoked strong criticisms by many Americans of the institution of slavery. This looks fine for me. This looks like, it provoked strong criticisms. Okay, that's a bit of a doubtful word, but still, then most of the people were indeed voicing it, so I can go with it. But produced little substantive action against. This is the problem. The passage actually has given a lot of points about the actions they have done, right? The entire second paragraph is talking about what they have done, like religious groups, a lot of individuals, they have manumitted, and they are also emancipation was happening post-independence. So, produce little substantial action looks like a very bad interpretation of the passage, right? So, that's against what the passage is feeling. The War of Independence renewed the efforts of many American groups towards achieving black emancipation. The problem here for me is this renewed the efforts. So the passage has not said that, it was already happening, the efforts were there, and then even though this is slightly, if you ask me, much better than A, B and D, because it's not outright rejection, statement, but we don't know. The passage hasn't explicitly mentioned that a lot of, American groups were first working and now they have intensified their efforts, or it has, renewed the efforts or something like that. But still, you can say maybe people were still working earlier. Now they sort of intensified it because of the War of Independence. Many Americans started to feel the problem, and then they started to appreciate the fact that they also deserve to get freedom. But still, this is not definitely the main theme. I would definitely, argue on this part, but leave just on the statement alone. Forget about whether it's a central theme or not. But it doesn't even give me the full picture of the central theme, right? That is, it's only talking about some American groups, many American groups working towards it. But what about the contradiction in the freedom fight and all of that? That's not all talk. So I would also delete this. I would only go for option C. That's a very good option to select. The passage contains information that would support which of the following statements about the colonies before the War of Independence. They contained organized anti-slavery societies. It's like, it has to confirm, right, would support. I really doubt if they have any organized. It says the passage did talk about anti-slavery societies, that like Quakers and other religious groups organized anti-slavery societies. But is that like organized, that's, so here the other religious groups organized anti-slavery societies basically means they formed. Here it is more like, they contained organized anti-slavery societies, more like, there's some structured or maybe some legal bodies or something, whatever the way you look at it. But definitely I would have a problem with this word. right? Then, and also we don't know whether they were there before the War of Independence, right? Because this has happened after the freedom fight has started. The War of Independence has started, people started to acknowledge the inconsistency. That's where the religious groups and the Quakers have started to organize this anti-slavery society. So that's not before. That's again no for me. They allowed individuals to own slaves. This seems to be a valid point. Why? It's clearly given, right, that a lot of people, numerous individuals manumitted their slaves. So that means individuals had their own slaves. So it seems to be something that was there before the War of Independence, that people had their own individual slaves, right? Slaves. So let's keep that for now. They prohibited religious groups from political action, not all discussed, right? Political actions and religious groups, not all talked. They said religious groups have worked towards organizing anti-slavery societies, but not related to any political action per se, out of context. There were inconsistencies in their legal definitions of slave status, not all discussed in the passage. Nowhere they said about the inconsistency about technically the legal definitions as well. They encouraged abolitionist societies to expand their influence. Again, completely out of scope. Like, I don't see any relevance with what's been discussed in the passage. So it's very easy that this is the only option that's making sense. According to the passage, the War of Independence was embarrassing to some Americans for which of the following reasons? It involved a struggle for many of the same liberties that Americans were denying to others. So that's, I have to see which of the three statements are correct for this option, right? So the War of Independence was embarrassing to some of the Americans for which of the following reasons? It's very clear, right? What was the embarrassing reason behind the embarrassment? The constant source of embarrassment was that these guys were fighting for freedom when they were taking away the freedom from some people. That's basically the black slaves, black Americans. So that's the source of. So it says it involved a struggle for many of the same liberties that Americans were denying to others. So that's what it says, right? These guys, same liberties, is like the liberty is basically the freedom part, right? All the things that you're allowed to do, the liberty to do certain things. So it involved a struggle for many of the same liberties that Americans were denying to others. These Americans were denying the freedom, the liberty to some people, and they were actually struggling or fighting for the same liberties, which is, a source of embarrassment, right? So I think the first statement is valid. So let's look at the second one. It involved a struggle for independence from the very nation that had founded the colonies. So this is ridiculous, right? This is not discussed. They did not find any embarrassment because they are fighting for independence against Great Britain. Let's say that Great Britain has founded the colonies, so they are ruling it, and they are not feeling bad for that reason. Not all discussed that. They don't have any issue with fighting against Great Britain for any reason, right? So that's absolutely wrong. It involved a struggle based on inconsistencies in the participants' conceptions of freedom. So it involved a struggle based on inconsistencies in the participants. So participants as in the Americans who are fighting for the war, the independence, right? Did they have a lot of inconsistency in understanding freedom? That's what it says. It involved a struggle based on inconsistencies in participants' conceptions of freedom. Let's say some Americans feel that the freedom is ABC, that they should have right to do this, right to do that, and some other Americans feel that their freedom is to do something. Let's say something like right to speech or something. Maybe some people would say I don't have any problem with not having that. Some people have a problem with that, something like that. So that inconsistency is an issue, and that's a source of embarrassment, is what the statement 3 is saying. This is also not discussed. They were not saying there's inconsistency in understanding our, the Americans' conceptions of freedom. No, that's not all talked about in the passage. So only statement 1 is correct, and also that is the reason for the constant embarrassment, right? So that's why only option A, 1 only is correct. That's what it said, right? The reason for the constant embarrassment is because they were taking away the freedom, and they were taking away the freedom for people who have the right to, who have as good a right to freedom as we have, but still we are taking away the freedom from them, and we are fighting for our own freedom. So that's the source for the embarrassment, and that's why it is involved a struggle for many of the same liberties, that's like for the freedom that Americans were denying to others. That's the correct statement. Which of the following statements regarding American society in the years immediately following the War of Independence is best supported by the passage? Right? What changes have happened post the war? That's what this question is saying. The unexpected success of the anti-slavery societies led to their gradual demise in the eastern states. This is not all talked, right? As if you can clearly see, what is the statement which talked post-independence? That is only the last line, right? So it says, in fact, within several years of the end of the War of Independence, most of the eastern states had made provisions for the gradual emancipation of slaves. That's the only takeaway for us from the passage. right? I don't have any clue on this unexpected success of the anti-slavery societies, led to their gradual demise in the eastern states. Right, so this is talking about the anti-slavery societies going down or something. That's not all talked. So that's no. Some of the newly independent American states had begun to make progress towards abolishing slavery. This looks like a decent thing. Some, because only some eastern states are, had made some provisions, right? Not all America. Some of the newly independent American states had begun to make progress towards abolishing slavery. If you clearly see this, that's what this last statement is saying. Most of the eastern states had made provisions for the gradual emancipation, not like immediate abolition. It's also gradually. So that's what this also says, right? Begun progress to make progress towards abolishing slavery. This is as good as it can get for me. Let's look at Americans like Abigail Adams became disillusioned with the slow progress of emancipation and gradually abandoned the cause. That's not all talk. They didn't say that people were happy or unhappy with what has happened post the war regarding the emancipation. So I don't have any clue on that. Became disillusioned. These are all like too much of a conclusion to make. Emancipated slaves gradually accepted in the eastern states as equal members of American society. This is something that I cannot comment. This is too much of an extrapolation. Yes, the eastern states had made provisions to slowly emancipate them, but doesn't mean that emancipated slaves were gradually accepted in these states as equal members. I mean, I don't know how the society is still taking it, right? Some people were unhappy with the freedom thing, etc. But we don't know about all the Americans, right? So I really doubt if we can make an interpretation like this, which is not as good as this, right? This is not as good as this for sure. B is much better. The abolition of slavery in many eastern states was the result of close cooperation between religious groups and free blacks. This is not all discussed. Right? Eastern states have made provisions, yes, but I don't have any comment on this element that they have a close cooperation between the religious groups and the free blacks. It's an absolutely ridiculous statement to make based on the passage. So no, that's not at all part of it. So that's option B is the answer. Right, so that's how you answer this. These questions, this passage is definitely on the easier side if you ask me.